We had to go through a lot of water. The sprinklers were running. There was a lot of debris on the floor. We got out of the lobby into the main World Trade Center shopping mall, which is also inside. From there, we were escorted out of the building, and then we moved away.
And did you learn of the second tower being hit?
I didn't know the second tower had been hit. I knew there was fire on both towers. We got about 2 blocks away, and then Building 2 started to collapse. So there were a number of us, we ran for cover. We ran into a subway station, but by that time we were already covered with soot. We had to go through a lot of falling glass and a lot of other kind of debris. And then we got out of the subway, and a couple blocks further, one collapsed.
You've been in earthquakes too, huh, Michael?
Yes, I used to live in California.
This much worse?
Much worse. It's not fun being at the epicenter.
No. And by the way, how long did it take to get down?
I would say altogether, from starting in the stairs to getting outside the building, for me, probably about 50 minutes or so. I was out about 20 minutes before 2 collapsed.
How's life for you now with no place to work?
Well, I'm doing fine. I've got a computer at home that talks. I can work at home. Even coming in this evening on the cell phone, I was speaking with one of our customers, Nam, who is talking about buying one of our libraries. And so I can conduct business on the phone. So we go forward from that standpoint. At the same time, I'm really ticked at the people that did this. They took our lives.
Michael, we salute you, and we salute Roselle.
Thank you very much. She's a good dog.
God bless.
God bless you.
Whew. So many lost their lives in Tuesday's terrorist attacks. Among them was Barbara Olson, attorney, best-selling author, and a very frequent guest on this program. There's that fantastic face and great smile. She was on American Airlines Flight 77. That's the one that hit the Pentagon. Her husband is the Solicitor General of the United States, Ted Olson. He talked with me earlier today, right after attending the National Cathedral service. And I asked him what it was like, for him especially, to go to that service.
Oh, it was enormously moving. And before I say anything more about that, I just wanted to thank you, Larry. It is a difficult thing to talk at a time like this, but you were such a dear friend to Barbara, and everybody connected with your program has always been so kind to her. And it is a dear friendship, and I'm very grateful for that friendship, and Barbara was.
And it's almost impossible to think of her as gone.
No, it is impossible to think of her as gone, and I think it will take a long time for me to absorb that, and I know all of her friends feel that way. Barbara was so full of life and so full of energy and so enthusiastic about everything that she did. I could go on and on.
Now we're going to help our audience with some information. Let's go back to Tuesday morning. First, it should be pointed on a personal note, Barbara Olson was scheduled to fly to Los Angeles to attend a major media business conference that I was the keynote speaker of, these ways of interconnecting. She flew on American Airlines Flight 77. Ted Olson and I flew on that flight together 2 days after the election. When we landed, Ted was paged, turned right around and went to Tallahassee to represent George Bush there in the fight for the presidency. So that given. She was supposed to go Monday and stayed over?
She was supposed to go Monday, and my birthday was Tuesday, and she decided that she was not going to go Monday. I told Barbara, I said, that's okay, we'll deal with my birthday later on. At my age, we're not paying too much attention to those. But she insisted. She did not want to be gone on the morning of my birthday, and she wanted to be there when I woke up, which she was. I left for work very early in the morning, before 6, and she left shortly after that to go to the airport.
The next time you hear from her is on the plane, right?
Actually, I heard from her before that.
Oh.
Before she boarded the plane, this plane was scheduled to leave, and I guess did leave at 8:10 in the morning. She called me. We always did this with one another. We always called one another a lot during the day. Sometimes very briefly, but she called me around, it must have been around 7:30 or 7:40 before she got on the plane. We just talked about one another and how anxious I was for her to come back and how anxious she was to return. But then I did not hear from her again until after she was in the air.
And the plane is now she's flying. She calls you. You're at the Justice Department, right? Solicitor General's office is at the Justice.
Yes.
All right. She calls you, and what?
Well, I had heard a few minutes before of the disaster occurring at the World Trade Center. There's a television set in the back of my office. I turned it on and watched with horror the film being replaying the airplanes crashing into the World Trade Center.
Both crashes.
Both. The second one had just occurred, I think, when I had turned it on, but they were all, well, it occurred in such a fashion that they had film of it, which, as this station, I think I was watching CNN, and I was relieved because at the moment that I heard there was hijacked planes, I was both terrified and fearful for everything that was going on, but I made a mental calculation because first thing that comes into your mind is that Barbara's plane, could that be one of those planes? And I thought, oh, thank goodness it can't be her plane. I'm sounding rather selfish here, but that just went through my mind because there wasn't enough time for that airplane to have gotten to New York. And then one of the secretaries rushed in and said, Barbara's on the phone. And I jumped for the phone, so glad to hear Barbara's voice. And then she told me our plane has been hijacked. Now this was sometime, must have been 9:15 or 9:30. Someone would have to reconstruct the time for me.
So the television's on, you're seeing the buildings both in disaster mode, and you're talking to your wife who's just been hijacked.
Yes.
And she says?
She says, we've just been hijacked. I had two conversations, Larry, and my memory tends to mix the two of them up because of the emotion of the events. We spoke for a minute or two, then the phone was cut off, then she got through again, and we spoke for another 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. She told me that the plane had been hijacked, that she told me that they did not know she was making this phone call. She told me that she had been herded to the back of the plane. She mentioned that they had used knives and box cutters to hijack the plane. She mentioned that the pilot had announced that the plane had been hijacked. I believe she said that. I had to tell her about the 2 airplanes that had hit the World Trade Center.
Why?
I just felt that I had to. I had to tell her. I'll look back at that and wonder about that same question myself, but I had to tell her.
You're the kind of couple, knowing you so well, you tell each other everything, right?
We are extraordinarily close. And
this was a mad love affair.
Yes, it was, and I could not have kept that from her.
What did she say when you told her?
I think she must have been partially in shock from the fact that she was on a hijacked plane. She absorbed the information. We then both reassured one another this plane was still up in the air, this plane was still flying, and this was going to come out okay. I told her it's going to come out okay. She told me it was going to come out okay. She said, I love you.
Didn't she ask about the pilot?
She said...
Was the pilot in the back with her then?
I don't know. But she told me at one point in this conversation, what shall I tell the pilot? What can I tell the pilot to do?
Implying that he must have been back there with her.
Either the pilot or possibly the co-pilot or a part of the crew. That was the implication, but I didn't really think to ask that specific question.
Did she sound terrified, anxious, nervous, scared?
No, she didn't. She sounded very, very calm.
Typical Barbara.
In retrospect, enormously, remarkably, incredibly calm. But she was calculating. I mean, she was wondering, what can I do to help solve this problem? Barbara was like that. Barbara could not have not done something. And so
what's going through you?
Oh, I am I guess I'm in shock and I'm horrified because I really, I had reassured her that I thought everything was going to be okay. I was pretty sure everything was not going to be okay. I by this time had made the calculation that these were suicide persons bent on destroying as much of America as they could.
Did you hear other noises on the plane?
No, I did not. At one point, when she asked me what to say to the pilot, I asked her if she had any sense for where she was. I had, after the first conversation, called our command center at the Department of Justice to alert them to the fact that there was another hijacked plane and that my wife was on it and that she was capable of communicating, even though this first phone call had been cut off. So I wanted to find out where the plane was. She said the plane had been hijacked shortly after takeoff, and they had been circling around, I think, with the words that she used. She reported to me that she could see houses. I asked her which direction the plane was going. She paused. There was a pause there. I think she must have asked someone else, and she said, I think it's going northeast.
Which would have been toward
Well,
the Pentagon,
it would have been.
right?
Well, depending upon where the plane was, it could have.
Dulles is
Dulles is west of the Pentagon,
Right,
and
yeah.
so east of Dulles is the Pentagon, and depending, this plane had been in the air for, I think, over an hour. So I don't know where she was when she called, but
so
that
this
could,
didn't do any direct flight right to the Pentagon.
No, her plane took off at 8:10, and its impact with the Pentagon must have been around 9:30 or so. I mean, you'll probably be able to reconstruct that or have that information. As to
how
the
does
time
the
of the
second
impact.
how does the second conversation end?
We segued back and forth between expressions of feeling for one another and this effort to exchange information, and then the phone went dead. I don't know whether it just got cut off again because the signals from cell phones coming from airplanes don't work that well, or whether that was the impact with the Pentagon. It was not. I stayed glued to my television. I did call the command center again. Someone came down so I could impart this information and also to be there in case she called again. But it was very shortly thereafter that news reports on the television indicated that there had been an explosion of some sort at the Pentagon.
Did you immediately know then that's what it was?
I did. I mean, I didn't want to.
But you did.
I did, and I didn't want to, but I knew. It was a long time before what had happened at the Pentagon, or it seemed like a long time before it was identified as an airplane. And then the first report that I heard was that it was a commuter plane, and then I heard it was an American Airlines plane. I called some people, I guess maybe just because I had to share the dread that was living with me. I called my mother and I called my son. I said I didn't think. I thought that I was hoping that it wasn't true, but I was very worried. I did not want them to see something on television and hear her name.
Your son was Barbara's stepson, right?
Yes, and well, I also tried to call my daughter, who is her stepdaughter.
Did you hear from the President or the Attorney General?
Oh, yes, I did. I heard from the President. Well, he was in the air. I can't tell you exactly what time of day that was on the 11th. I also heard from the Attorney General. I also heard from the Vice President and many other of our officials of government, and of course not thousands, but scores of other people, including you and your wife. And
how were you, as you look at yourself and looking at you now, how were you able, and everybody I'm sure is saying this, to handle this so well?
I think that nature protects us by putting us in some sort of shock.
That you might still be in?
Well, I think that I haven't talked to people that they call grief counselors or anything like that, but I think that people are in shock for a considerable period of time. That's why you're advised, I mean, not to make important decisions, not to do things that don't make sense. That's why people gather around. That's why friends show up at your home. That's why people go with you wherever you go, just to be able to talk to you and insulate you from the emotions that are so packed so strongly in your body.
By the way, was the President comforting?
I thought the President was wonderfully comforting
to you on the phone?
Oh, yes, he was, enormously. We couldn't speak long. This was during the day of the crisis, and I hadn't expected him to call because he's the President of the United States. We know now, well, he knew then there were thousands of victims and terrible devastation and crisis, and the potential of further dangers to the structure of our government, meaning the institutions of our government and the leadership of our government, I am deeply indebted to him that he had the time to call, and he was very comforting. He is a